The sun hung low over the endless desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The wind swept over the dunes, carrying grains of sand that glimmered like tiny stars in the fading light. The desert was quiet except for the distant calls of unseen birds, the whisper of the wind, and the soft crunch of footsteps across the sand. A small research team was making its way through the barren landscape. Their mission was to document unusual patterns in the desert, collect samples, and observe signs of life that few had ever seen. Among them was a man named Daniel, a young anthropologist who had spent years studying rare and unknown creatures. He had always been drawn to the mysteries of the natural world, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to encounter. As the team moved forward, Daniel noticed something strange. The sand seemed disturbed, as though something large had moved through it recently. The footprints were unlike anything he had seen before. They were wide and deep, with claw-like impressions, yet the shape suggested a form that walked upright. He knelt down, brushing away the wind-blown sand to examine the tracks more closely. "These aren't animal tracks," he murmured to himself. "They belong to something intelligent." The team followed the trail cautiously, their senses heightened by curiosity and unease. As they crested a small dune, a figure appeared in the distance. At first, it was just a silhouette, a shadow against the glowing horizon. But as they approached, the creature became clearer. She was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Standing over 6 feet tall with long limbs covered in short silvery fur, she moved with grace and strength. Her face was a blend of human and animal features, high cheekbones, large expressive eyes, and a slightly elongated jaw. Her ears were pointed, her hair wild and flowing, and her movements carried both power and elegance. Despite her imposing appearance, there was something in her eyes that caught Daniel's attention. It was fear mixed with defiance, a spark of intelligence and curiosity. She had been cornered near a cluster of rocks by a group of desert dwellers, people who seemed ready to harm her. Daniel could see the tension in her posture, every muscle tensed, every clawed hand ready to strike or defend. She seemed to understand the danger around her and yet stood her ground, refusing to flee. The desert dwellers shouted at her in harsh tones, gesturing aggressively. They wanted to punish her for disobedience, though Daniel could not understand the rules she had broken. Whatever her crime, it seemed serious to them. She lowered her head slightly, her body bristling, as if readying herself for the impact of whatever harm they intended. Daniel's heart raced. He knew that if she faced their wrath, she might not survive. He also knew that intervening would be risky. This creature was strong and unpredictable, and the desert dwellers would not take kindly to interference. Despite the danger, Daniel felt a strange connection to her. He stepped forward slowly, trying to make his presence calm and non-threatening. He raised his hand, palm out, in a gesture of peace, "It's okay," he whispered, hoping she could sense his intentions. She froze, her large eyes locking onto his. Her chest heaved as she assessed the situation, unsure whether this human meant to help or to attack. Daniel's mind raced. He had read about first encounters between humans and unknown species, but nothing could truly prepare anyone for the reality of standing face to face with something entirely alien, yet undeniably intelligent. The desert dwellers hesitated as well. They did not expect anyone to challenge them, and certainly not someone who approached with calm confidence instead of fear or anger. The standoff lasted several tense moments. The wind continued to blow, lifting the sand around them and adding an almost otherworldly haze to the scene. The alien Beastwoman's ears twitched, her eyes flicking between Daniel and the threatening group behind her. She seemed to weigh her options: fight, flee, or trust this human who dared step into the danger zone. Daniel took another careful step forward. He spoke softly, using gentle sounds and a rhythm he hoped would be reassuring. Every instinct screamed for him to be careful, to avoid sudden movements, but he knew that hesitation could cost her life. He extended his hand a little further, keeping his body relaxed and open. The desert dwellers exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to act or retreat. Slowly, the alien Beastwoman lowered her body, her movements cautious and deliberate. Each step toward Daniel seemed measured, as though she were testing whether his gesture was genuine. Her claws barely touched the sand as she approached, careful not to appear threatening. Her breathing was rapid but controlled, a mixture of tension and hope. Daniel whispered words of encouragement, though he doubted she could understand them. Still, the tone mattered. It was calm, steady, and kind, unlike the harsh shouts she had been subjected to moments before. When she was close enough, Daniel noticed the subtle details that revealed her intelligence. She tilted her head, observing him with curiosity. Her ears flicked, capturing every sound. Her eyes, large and expressive, seemed to search for sincerity. Daniel realized that this was not merely a wild creature. She had her own understanding of rules, society, and perhaps even morality. Whatever had caused the desert dwellers to target her, it was clear she did not act out of malice. The final steps were the hardest. Every muscle in her body seemed to tense as she extended her hand, placing it near Daniel's. The moment was delicate, charged with anticipation. If she pulled back, the situation could escalate. If she accepted his gesture, it could mean safety, understanding, and the beginning of something extraordinary. She touched his hand, a simple act that carried immense significance. It was trust, extended across species, across worlds. At that instant, Daniel felt a surge of relief. The alien Beastwoman allowed herself to be guided away from the threat, her tension slowly easing. The desert dwellers, unsure of what to do, stepped back. Daniel walked carefully, matching her pace, speaking softly and making sure she felt secure. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dunes. In that moment, the desert seemed less hostile, less empty. Two beings from entirely different worlds had connected, even if only through a gesture and mutual understanding. By the time they reached a safer area, the alien Beastwoman had relaxed slightly, though her alertness never left her entirely. Daniel observed her closely, noting the way she moved, the subtle shifts in her expression and the intelligence in her eyes. He understood that this encounter was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead: communication, cultural, understanding, and trust. But for now, they had crossed the first barrier. The moment was a reminder that sometimes the simplest act, a hand extended, a gesture of kindness, could make the difference between harm and hope. HTP U2BE RQMHIOA. The desert was quieter now, the wind whispering softly over the dunes. Daniel led the alien Beastwoman to a small sheltered area formed by a cluster of rocks. It was not much, but it provided protection from the wind and the setting sun. She stayed close to him, her body still tense, her large eyes scanning the surroundings. Every so often she flicked her ears, listening intently to distant sounds. Daniel understood that her world had rules and dangers far beyond what he could imagine, and he respected her caution. He crouched down, keeping his hands visible and moving slowly. "It's okay," he said gently, hoping the tone mattered as much as the words themselves. She tilted her head, regarding him with curiosity. Her movements were cautious but deliberate, showing that she was beginning to consider him not as a threat, but as a guide, someone who might help her navigate this strange situation. Daniel felt a mix of relief and determination. He knew the first step in building trust was patience and consistency. Any sudden move or forceful gesture could undo the fragile bond they were forming. For several minutes, they simply stayed in silence. The desert grew darker, stars beginning to appear, scattered like tiny diamonds across the sky. The alien Beastwoman finally relaxed slightly, though her muscles remained coiled like springs ready to react. Daniel observed her, noting the way she shifted her weight, how her tail moved slightly, and how her large, expressive eyes reflected the starlight. He realized that understanding her body language would be as important as understanding her words. Then he noticed a subtle change. Her breathing slowed, and she took a tentative step closer. It was a small act, but it carried immense meaning. She was testing whether the calmness and safety he offered were real. Daniel smiled gently, nodding. He extended his hand slightly, again, not to touch her but to show that he was patient, waiting for her to make the next move. She hesitated, then cautiously let her fingers brush against his palm. The contact was brief, yet it sent a strong message of trust. Daniel knew that. This trust was fragile. One wrong move, one sudden action, and she might retreat or even react defensively. He kept his tone soft, his gestures deliberate, and his presence steady. "I won't hurt you," he whispered. Though she couldn't fully understand his words, his calm energy seemed to communicate something beyond language. Her eyes softened, the tension in her body easing fractionally. As the minutes passed, Daniel realized that she was not only intelligent, but also highly perceptive. She observed his every movement, evaluating his intentions. She tilted her head as if analyzing him, her expressive eyes studying his face, his hands, and even the way he breathed. Daniel felt an odd sense of connection, as if they were communicating on some deeper level beyond words. He had read about moments like this in reports of first encounters between humans and unknown species, but nothing compared to the reality of experiencing it firsthand. Night fully settled over the desert. The temperature dropped, and the wind carried a faint chill. Daniel offered a small blanket he had in his backpack, placing it gently near the alien Beastwoman. At first, she hesitated, eyeing it suspiciously. But then, with careful, deliberate movements, she approached it and allowed herself to rest partially on the blanket. It was a small victory, but it showed progress. She was beginning to accept comfort from someone outside her own kind, learning that safety could exist beyond the harsh rules of her previous environment. Daniel decided it was time to try gentle communication. He began making simple gestures, pointing to himself, then to her, then drawing shapes in the sand to indicate calm and safety. The alien Beastwoman watched him carefully, her head tilting, ears twitching, and eyes wide with curiosity. Slowly, she began to mimic some of the gestures, though with her own variations. It was a tentative beginning, a form of conversation through body language, patience, and observation. Throughout the night, Daniel maintained a careful balance of proximity and space. He wanted her to feel safe, but not pressured. He could see that she was learning to gauge trust, measuring the intentions behind every movement he made. Occasionally, she would glance toward the distant dunes, alert to potential threats. Daniel realized that her caution was not fear alone. It was instinct, shaped by a world he could not fully comprehend. Yet, despite that, she continued to return her attention to him, a clear sign that she was willing to explore this human connection. Hours passed, and the alien Beastwoman began to relax further. She stretched her long limbs cautiously, then leaned slightly toward Daniel in a gesture of tentative acceptance. Her breathing became more regular, her large eyes blinking slowly in a sign of comfort. Daniel could see her beginning to process the possibility that she did not need to react with aggression or fear to every situation. She was learning something entirely new, that trust and patience could coexist with strength, that choosing to accept help did not make her weak. The desert seemed to respond to their connection. The wind softened and the night air carried a quiet calm. Daniel spoke softly, repeating simple words and phrases, though he knew she might not understand them. His tone, however, was consistent, calm, steady, and reassuring. Every gesture, every glance, every small act of patience contributed to the growing understanding between them. It was a slow process, but each step mattered. Eventually, she moved, closer still, allowing him to guide her a few steps further from the rocks. They walked slowly, carefully avoiding sudden movements, Daniel keeping his hand out to show continued peace and reassurance. The alien Beastwoman followed, her trust deepening with each cautious step. She began to respond to his gestures and soft sounds, showing that learning to understand one another was possible even across vast differences in species and culture. By the time dawn approached, the alien Beastwoman had taken another small but significant step. She allowed Daniel to help her navigate uneven sand dunes, showing a willingness to rely on someone beyond herself for the first time. The bond they were forming was subtle, but profound. Trust was growing, one careful action at a time. The desert, which had seemed so harsh and unforgiving the night before, now felt like a place where connection and understanding could take root. Daniel reflected on the events of the night. He realized that this encounter was not just about saving her from immediate danger. It was about showing that another way of living, another set of rules, could exist, one that valued empathy, patience, and communication over punishment and fear. The alien Beastwoman had faced harm for disobedience in her own world. But now, through a simple act of extending a hand and offering safety, Daniel had begun to show her that life could be different. As the first light of morning touched the desert, she looked at him with her large, expressive eyes. There was still caution, still tension, but also curiosity, recognition, and the beginning of hope. She had made a choice, and in doing so, she had opened herself to a new path, one that would lead to understanding, trust, and perhaps even friendship. Daniel knew that the journey was only beginning, but the foundation was set. The moment they had shared, the quiet night, the gestures, the patience, was a turning point that would shape the days to come. The desert was slowly waking under the early morning sun. The wind had calmed and the dunes glowed a warm golden color. Daniel and the alien Beastwoman continued moving carefully through the landscape. She followed him closely, still alert, yet more relaxed than the night before. Every step she took reflected both her strength and her growing trust. Daniel realized that building trust was not a single act. It was a process that required patience, consistency, and understanding. As they walked, Daniel observed her closely. Her movements were graceful but powerful, each step precise. Her large eyes scanned the horizon constantly, ears twitching at even the faintest sound. She was aware of everything around her, yet she continued to follow him. It was clear that she was learning to trust his guidance without completely letting go of her own instincts. Daniel admired her resilience and intelligence. She was not a simple creature. She had thoughts, emotions, and an innate understanding of the world that went far beyond basic survival. The first challenge came when they reached a small canyon. The path was narrow, with jagged rocks on either side. The alien Beastwoman hesitated at the entrance, her muscles tensing as if ready to flee or defend herself. Daniel approached slowly, extending his hand once again in the familiar gesture of peace. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice steady and calm. She studied him for a long moment, then cautiously stepped forward. Each movement was careful and deliberate, a sign that she was learning to rely on him while maintaining her own strength and independence. As they navigated the canyon, Daniel began to notice more about her behavior. She was curious about everything: how the light shifted on the rocks, how the wind moved through the narrow passage, and even the subtle sounds that humans often ignored. She occasionally reached out to touch the rocks, feeling their texture and weight. Daniel realized that she was trying to understand this unfamiliar environment, just as he was trying to understand her. It was a delicate balance of observation and learning, with both of them adjusting to one another. They stopped for a moment at a small pool of water hidden in a shaded part of the canyon. The alien Beastwoman approached it cautiously, her reflection shimmering on the surface. She tilted her head, examining her own image with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Daniel could see that she was beginning to understand herself in a new context, seeing not just the strength and power in her form, but also the possibility of gentleness and cooperation. He remained silent, giving her space while signaling safety through small, careful gestures. As she drank from the pool, Daniel took the opportunity to communicate in subtle ways. He drew simple shapes in the sand, using them to show paths, safety, and calm. The alien Beastwoman watched closely, occasionally mimicking his movements or tilting her head as if processing the information. It was a slow form of learning, but every small interaction strengthened the bond between them. She was beginning to see that not every encounter needed to be met with fear or aggression, and that guidance could come without threats or punishment. The journey continued for hours. The alien Beastwoman moved with increasing confidence, her steps becoming more assured. Yet she remained cautious, aware of potential dangers. Daniel admired this combination of trust and vigilance. She was learning to navigate a new world while staying true to herself. It was a delicate balance, and he knew that forcing her to act differently would break the trust they had built. Instead, he focused on encouragement, gentle guidance, and respect for her instincts. At one point, they came across a narrow ledge overlooking a deep canyon. The alien Beastwoman froze, her eyes wide and her muscles tense. The height and exposure were intimidating even to a human. Yet she was also curious. Daniel knelt slightly, extending his hand and offering reassurance. She hesitated, then placed a clawed hand in his. Together they moved carefully along the ledge, step by step. It was a powerful moment, trust in action. She allowed herself to rely on him while still maintaining her awareness and strength. During the walk, Daniel began to notice subtle expressions of emotion. She would glance at him after making a step, as if seeking confirmation. Sometimes she would tilt her head, studying him as if weighing his intentions. Other times she would pause, breathing slowly, allowing herself a moment of calm. It was clear that she was learning not only to trust him, but also to regulate her own emotions in response to a new environment and a new companion. By mid-morning, they reached a wider part of the canyon where sunlight streamed down, creating patterns on the sand and rocks. The alien Beastwoman stopped to explore, her movements becoming more fluid and natural. She touched the walls, ran her fingers over the stones, and even let out a soft, curious sound. Daniel recognized it as a form of expression, an indication that she was comfortable enough to interact with the environment without fear. It was a breakthrough moment, the first real sign that she was beginning to accept not just his guidance, but the possibility of experiencing the world in a different way. Daniel continued to communicate through gestures, voice, and careful touch. He pointed to the horizon, showing her distant landmarks, and then mimicked walking toward them. She watched, then mirrored his movements. It was a simple act, yet it showed progress in understanding and cooperation. She was beginning to learn that the human was not just a guide or protector, but also a partner in exploring the unknown. As they moved forward, the alien Beastwoman occasionally glanced back toward the dunes they had left behind. It was a reminder of her past, the harsh rules, the dangers, and the punishments she had faced. Yet each glance was less tense than the last. She was learning to leave fear behind, at least temporarily, and to embrace the possibility of choice. Daniel understood that this was not an easy process for her. Her instincts and past experiences were deeply ingrained, yet she was willing to take small steps toward trust and understanding. By late morning, they stopped near a cluster of large boulders that offered shade and a resting spot. The alien Beastwoman settled down, curling her long limbs in a relaxed position, though she still remained alert. Daniel sat nearby, careful to maintain a respectful distance while offering calm presence. They had shared hours of movement, communication, and observation, and the bond between them had grown significantly. She had begun to understand that not all humans were threats, and that guidance could coexist with respect for her independence. Daniel reflected on the journey so far. The alien Beastwoman had faced danger, misunderstanding, and potential harm, yet she had chosen to extend trust. She had taken a path of learning and adaptation, exploring new ways of interacting with a world that was foreign to her. For Daniel, it was a reminder of the power of patience, empathy, and gentle guidance. One act of trust had blossomed into a deeper connection, one that could shape both of their futures. The alien Beastwoman, though still cautious, began to explore her surroundings more freely. She touched the rocks, listened to the wind, and moved with a growing sense of confidence. Daniel observed, providing reassurance when needed and allowing her space when necessary. It was a delicate dance of trust, learning, and mutual respect. Each step, each gesture, each shared moment was a building block in a relationship that transcended fear and misunderstanding. By the time the sun reached its peak, Daniel and the alien Beastwoman had covered a significant distance. She had grown more confident, more curious, and more willing to engage. It was a turning point in their journey, a moment when trust began to take root, and understanding started to replace fear. Daniel knew that challenges still lay ahead, but for now, the bond they had formed was strong enough to carry them forward. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the dunes. Daniel and the alien Beastwoman had been traveling together for some time now. She had begun to move with a growing confidence, her body relaxed yet alert. Every step seemed less hesitant, every gesture less tense. Yet she still had moments of hesitation, a reminder of the dangers she had faced before encountering him. As they reached a small oasis hidden between dunes, Daniel noticed how cautiously she approached the water. The alien Beastwoman paused, sniffing the air and scanning the area with large, expressive eyes. She lowered herself slowly, her movements careful and deliberate yet curious. Daniel stayed back slightly, giving her space while maintaining a presence that was both reassuring and protective. He knew that forcing her forward would only break the trust they had built. Patience was key. She drank from the pool, her reflection shimmering in the water. Daniel watched as she studied her own image, tilting her head with curiosity. For the first time, he saw a spark of self-awareness in her eyes. Not fear, not survival instinct, but contemplation. It was as if she was beginning to understand that her world of strict rules and harsh consequences was not the only way to live. Daniel smiled, feeling that small victories like this were important building blocks in the trust they were developing. After a brief pause, she turned to observe Daniel. He reached out a hand, not touching her but showing a gesture of peace and guidance. Slowly, she stepped closer. She was beginning to understand that she could accept help without losing her strength or independence. Daniel felt a deep sense of connection. Every small movement, every shared glance was reinforcing a bond that went beyond language. He began using simple gestures and actions to communicate. Drawing patterns in the sand, pointing to objects and demonstrating calm behaviors, he invited her to explore and interact. The alien Beastwoman watched intently, her eyes wide and attentive. Occasionally, she mimicked his gestures or tried to understand their meaning. This silent dialogue created a rhythm between them, a rhythm of patience, understanding, and gradual learning. As they explored the oasis, Daniel noticed more about her intelligence and curiosity. She touched the plants carefully, studying their texture. She listened to the sounds of water trickling from a small spring and to the distant calls of birds. Every movement showed that she was learning to interact with the environment in a new way, guided by observation and cautious trust. Daniel felt that this was the beginning of true understanding, a connection not just between human and alien, but between minds willing to adapt and learn from each other. They continued walking through the oasis, stepping over roots and rocks. The alien Beastwoman occasionally glanced back at the dunes they had left behind. Daniel understood that these glances reflected memories of her past, the dangers, the punishments, and the rules she had lived by. Yet each glance was less tense than the last. She was learning that safety could exist, that trust was possible, and that she could make choices without fearing immediate harm. During their journey, Daniel tried to introduce small lessons in cooperation. He showed her how to navigate tricky terrain, how to identify safe paths, and how to use her natural abilities in combination with his guidance. She began to respond, not blindly following, but learning to act in partnership. Every time she successfully completed a task with his guidance, a subtle change occurred. Her body relaxed a little more, her eyes softened, and her trust deepened. By midday, they had reached a small plateau overlooking a valley. The alien Beastwoman paused, surveying the landscape. Daniel could see the mix of emotions on her face: curiosity, caution, and a faint sense of wonder. He realized that she was beginning to imagine possibilities beyond the strict, rigid rules of her previous world. She could see that cooperation and understanding were choices she could make, and that these choices would not lead to punishment. As they rested, Daniel continued his gentle teaching. He made gestures, spoke softly, and created small exercises for observation and interaction. The alien Beastwoman watched carefully, engaging in ways that demonstrated comprehension and growing confidence. She began to initiate small actions, like touching a rock to feel its texture or stepping over an obstacle in her own way. Each independent action reinforced her learning and strengthened the trust between them. The day progressed, and the alien Beastwoman began to explore more freely. She moved with grace and curiosity, testing her limits and learning from Daniel's guidance. They discovered a variety of desert plants and observed small animals together. She began to react to Daniel's cues without hesitation, a clear sign that she was internalizing the lessons of trust, patience, and observation. Daniel realized that their bond had grown stronger than he could have imagined. By evening, the alien Beastwoman had changed noticeably. Her eyes, once filled with tension and fear, now showed calm and interest. Her movements were confident, deliberate, and yet still cautious when necessary. Daniel understood that trust was no longer fragile. It had become resilient. She had learned that she could navigate the world with a partner, without sacrificing her instincts or independence. As the sun set, casting golden light across the oasis, Daniel and the alien Beastwoman sat quietly together. Words were not necessary. The connection was evident in every glance, every movement, and every gesture. For the first time, she seemed to understand that life could be different, that choices could be made without fear, and that cooperation and empathy were not weaknesses. The first rays of morning painted the desert in soft pinks and oranges. Daniel and the alien Beastwoman were ready to continue their journey. The bond they had formed over the past days had grown deeper. She now walked beside him with confidence, yet her awareness of the environment never wavered. Daniel felt a quiet pride, knowing that she had learned to balance trust with vigilance, a skill essential for both survival and understanding. Their path led them to a series of small hills. Daniel pointed out the safest routes, demonstrating movements and gestures she could follow. The alien Beastwoman mirrored his actions, carefully observing how he navigated the uneven terrain. Each step she took with guidance reinforced her confidence and deepened her understanding. She had begun to see him not just as a guide, but as a partner, someone who respected her strength while offering support. As they moved, the alien Beastwoman started experimenting with her own gestures, trying to communicate her thoughts and observations. Daniel noticed subtle expressions, tilts of her head, flicks of her ears, changes in posture that indicated curiosity, agreement, or questions. He responded with gentle gestures and soft sounds, encouraging her to continue exploring communication beyond words. This mutual understanding created a rhythm between them, a dance of observation and learning. Around midday, they reached a narrow gorge with steep walls. The alien Beastwoman paused, scanning the area carefully. She seemed to recognize potential dangers, but also possibilities. Daniel stepped forward slowly, extending his hand and showing her a safe path along the edge. She took a measured step, then another, trusting him while remaining vigilant. Together they navigated the gorge, their movements in harmony. It was a moment of triumph, showing that cooperation and trust could achieve what alone might be impossible. After clearing the gorge, they arrived at a small valley filled with vegetation and wildlife. The alien Beastwoman's curiosity was evident. As she approached cautiously, observing the environment with fascination, Daniel watched, understanding that this new space offered opportunities for learning and exploration. She began to interact with the plants and small animals gently, testing her instincts in a controlled, safe environment. Each action reinforced the lessons of trust, patience, and observation. Over the course of the day, the alien Beastwoman became increasingly independent in her decisions. She began to anticipate Daniel's guidance, moving in ways that reflected both understanding and confidence. She climbed rocks, examined plants, and even began to explore areas slightly beyond Daniel's reach, all while maintaining awareness of his presence. The balance between independence and trust had been achieved, a remarkable transformation from the tense, cautious creature he had first encountered. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, the alien Beastwoman looked at Daniel with large, expressive eyes. There was gratitude, curiosity, and a sense of peace. She had faced danger, misunderstanding, and fear. But now she had learned a new way to navigate the world, through trust, empathy, and cooperation. Daniel knew that their journey had reached a pivotal point. The lessons she had learned would carry her forward, helping her make choices with confidence rather than fear. They rested together as night fell, the stars beginning to shimmer across the sky. Words were unnecessary. Every gesture, glance, and movement spoke volumes. The alien Beastwoman now understood that the world could be approached differently, that trust and partnership were as powerful as instinct and strength. Daniel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had not only helped her avoid harm, but had also shown her that life could be lived with understanding and choice. As the night deepened, she curled her limbs comfortably, her breathing calm and steady. Daniel sat nearby, watching the stars, reflecting on their journey. One simple act of